Good evening, everyone. This is writer Coach Tony, and today, one of my clients asked me, "What are the components of a thesis?" So I was very surprised. I was like, "What? Oh, okay. So you don't even know um, what are inside a thesis?" So anyway, that's what we are going to discuss today. So we are going to discuss the components of a thesis. So what chapters compose a thesis? So it would depend on the university, it would depend on the course, but generally, most theses follow a certain outline. So I'm going to discuss that outline now. So there are 5 chapters usually, and usually they have the same headings. I encountered schools before which follow a certain format, which is different from the one I'm going to tell you, but they're more of the exception than the rule. So the rule is there are 5 chapters. The first chapter is the introduction. So the introduction, as the name says, introduces the topic to the reader, or to the panel. So the goal of the researcher is to look for a research gap. So you cannot just do a study that has been done before because it would be irrelevant. You have to look for a research gap. Um, so there's a previous study you want to do, but you have to look for a research gap. Otherwise, if you just replicate another person's study, um, most likely your supervisor will not, or your advisor will not approve it. So what I strongly suggest is, as you're reading through different studies and you already have something in your mind, you look for the research gap. That's the most important thing. And also that's the one I usually look for when I coach my students when they write their thesis. So, so you have the background of the study, statement of the problem, significance of the study, the limitations, definitions of term. So usually that's what's inside the introduction. Basically, you're setting up the study, um, and then you're telling the reader that this is what I'm going to study. This is a research gap. These are the objectives of my study. These are the variables I want to study, and then the limitations are only up to here. And the study is important because it will, blah blah blah. And then you have to define the terms because um, those terms are defined based on the context of the study. So that's how they are defined. Okay, that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is review of related literature. So again, there are 2 parts to this. There are the literature part, which consists of journal art, no, um, papers from the United Nations or any important organization, anything that is not a study. So it's any literature. It can be a book, it can be a website, it can be a blog, but it has to come from a reliable source, and as much as possible, it should be scientific in nature, because otherwise, um, it might not have any credibility. For example, if it just comes from any blogger, and that blogger has no credentials in the community, in the academic community, then that blog might be giving insignificant information. Okay, in the review of literature, there's also the studies. So you search for studies which are relevant to your thesis topic. So usually it's 5, but depends. Some schools even ask you to read up to 30 journal studies. So it's really up to you to summarize everything and compress them, pick out the major points, and again, always think of the research gap. So um, make sure you're connecting everything to the research gap, and the review of related literature will highlight that there really is a gap in the research, and that means you're really looking for answers for a new set of questions. Okay, that's the second chapter. Third chapter is methodology. How will you go about your study? So in that part, it's either you'll do quantitative, qualitative, And then under those two, there are different types of studies. So anyway, we'll tackle that in another discussion. But the methodology just tells you what process you're going to undertake to answer your statement of the problem. So that's basically the methodology. You'll also discuss there who your respondents, who are you going to interview, where you're going to interview them, uh, why you chose these respondents. No? And there's also a part there which asks for reliability and validity. So sometimes if you have a survey questionnaire, you have to validate it before you can use it. That will be another topic for another talk. So that's chapter 3. So now we have chapter 1, introduction, chapter 2, review of related literature, chapter 3, methodology, chapter 4 is a presentation and analysis of data. So here, if you're doing a quantitative study, you just present the raw data and the answers using statistical analysis. So your answers are all numerical, and your job is to interpret those numbers. So if it says correlation equals something something 2.5, you have to say why, what does that 2.5 stand for? Is there a correlation between the variables you're measuring? Or let's say if you say if you go to the hospital now, your chances of getting COVID is higher compared to if you just stay at home. So you're comparing if there is a significant relationship between certain variables. So that's the bulk of chapter 4. So it's a lot of statistics if you're doing quantitative. If it's qualitative, then you can do case study form or an ethnography. It depends on your statement of the problem. So your problem will dictate what kind of methodology you will use. But all the facts that you gather will be placed in chapter 4. So if it's a case study, make sure it has a case study form, and then write about the case very clearly, making sure that you answer each of the statement of the problem. Finally, chapter 5 is the summary, conclusion, and recommendation. So there's 3 parts. So first part is a summary. You summarize everything. And then conclusion, you list down all the conclusions that you came up with based on your answers to the statement of the problem. So you can say that there is no significant relationship between A and B, or it really depends. So there's so many conclusions, but as your guide, you just answer what's in the statement of the problem. That's all. It also makes it easier for the teacher to see if you did answer your research questions. Finally, there is a recommendations part. So here, this is usually where the research gap is placed. So when you're starting with your study, you can go to the recommendations part and find out what the researcher recommends, because they will recommend what further studies can be done on their study. For example, they only tested for men in their studies. So maybe in your study you now include women. Or let's say if they only tested for men of a certain age from 25 to 50. So maybe you can extend the study to include those men who are older than 50. So the recommendations part is very important, because that's where you can get your next study, and that's where you also place what can still be studied because of the limitations you met. The problem with doing a research is you only have like 1 year to do it, and then there's a time frame that you have to do it. So you cannot do everything. That's why you can put in the recommendations that since we were not able to do this, I would recommend that next researchers will do this. So that part is very important, and I always tell that to my clients. So again, the thesis usually has 5 chapters. That is its outline. Chapter 1 is introduction. Chapter 2 is review of related literature. Chapter 3 is methodology. Chapter 4 is the presentation and interpretation of and analysis of data. And chapter 5 is summary, conclusion, and recommendations. So if you have any questions, please just email me. I put the numbers there below. Just look down in the below the YouTube video. I've put my numbers there and my email. Please email me there if you have any questions. If you want me to talk about other things about writing which you think I can help you, please leave me a message and I will make a video just for your request. So anyway, thank you very much for your time. Before I end, I want to give a shout out to all the frontliners out there. Thank you for your courage and your efforts in keeping all of us, keeping those coronavirus patients healthy and on the way to recovery. So bye bye everyone. See you in my next video.